Bernd Lehmann was born in Germany, but moved to Australia in the 1960s, and eventually became an Australian citizen. He lived in Ashfield, a suburb in the inner west of Sydney, and worked as a caretaker for disabled individuals. On February 12, 2008, Bernd was scheduled to fly back to Germany on a 4:55 p.m. flight out of Sydney. He would be spending 3 months there to help care for his critically ill mother. Bernd did not board his flight, however, and was found dead in the kitchen of his apartment on Alt Street around 7 p.m. on Valentine's Day, 2 days after he was supposed to leave for Germany. Authorities placed Bernd's time of death between 11:50 a.m. and the time he should have boarded his flight on the 12th. He had died as a result of severe injuries to his head, and there were signs of a desperate struggle in his apartment. Police would later describe the brutal attack he had endured as vicious and frenzied. They believe Bernd had been struck in the head approximately 20 times with a 6-pound statue, and that his killer had subsequently made an unsuccessful attempt to decapitate him with a knife from the kitchen. Robbery was eliminated as a motive, as nothing was stolen from the apartment. Police suspected, based on the extent of the injuries inflicted to Bernd and the rage that must have been behind them, that there was some sort of emotional motivation to the crime. To investigate the murder, Strikeforce Navila was created, bringing together detectives from Burwood Police Area Command and the State Crime Command's Homicide Squad. A $100,000 reward was offered for information in the case, and investigators followed up on Bernd's known friends and associates, looking for potential suspects, but years would drag on with no arrests. A coronial inquest into the case was held in 2012, after which the case was sent to the Unsolved Homicide Unit. In 2018, investigators revisited DNA evidence collected at the crime scene. The new review was initially conducted by the Forensic Evidence and Technical Services Technology Command, and the samples were then sent to the Genetic Ancestry Laboratory, maintained by the University of Canberra and the University of Technology Sydney, to undergo DNA phenotyping. The laboratory was able to confirm that the DNA came from a male, but not from Bernd Lehmann. Their analysis found that the contributor of the DNA probably did not have blonde hair or blue eyes, and was most likely of mixed European, Middle Eastern, and African ancestry. Unfortunately, there was no match to the DNA on file. Because it was a violent crime, they left a lot of forensic evidence behind, and that was exposed in our benefit. Detective Superintendent Danny Doherty, New South Wales Police Homicide Squad Commander, would later say, DNA was found on 8 cigarette butts left in Bernd's lounge, and in semen on his body. According to Detective Superintendent Doherty, it's not just DNA, it's where it's found in the unit, and it's found in places where it gives us confidence that this person will be charged later on. In February of 2021, police announced that the New South Wales government was increasing the reward for information in the case to $1 million, in a renewed effort to generate tips from the public. Less than a month later, on March 17, 2021, 66-year-old Naji Fakhruddin was arrested outside his home in Arncliffe at 7:30 in the morning, and was later formally charged with Bernd Lehmann's murder. Fakhruddin had initially come to the attention of the authorities thanks to information received from a member of the public. However, he was initially only known to them as an unnamed associate. Police were later able to use what they have described as innovative techniques to identify him and match his DNA to the DNA found at the crime scene. Due to ongoing court proceedings, authorities have not been able to provide details on these methods and techniques. However, one of Fakhruddin's 8 children is a high-ranking member of a motorcycle gang and is currently incarcerated for drug trafficking. This would give authorities access to his DNA, which means it is possible that police were then led to his father through familial DNA. Following his arrest, the elder Fakhruddin was brought in for questioning and for further forensic testing. Police would later say that bloody finger and palm prints left on the statue believed to be the murder weapon also tied Fakhruddin to the crime scene. Police believe that Bernd and Fakhruddin were casual acquaintances. A motive has not been firmly established. Detective Superintendent Doherty could not elaborate on what police believed the motive to be due to the ongoing court proceedings, but did reiterate that robbery had been excluded as a motive. When asked by the media if Bernd's sexuality had some role in the motive, Detective Superintendent Doherty could not exclude that possibility. Fakhreddin appeared before the Sutherland local court on March 17th. He did not enter a plea and was denied bail by the court. His next court appearance is scheduled for May. For Bernd to die in such a violent way, after spending his life caring and helping others, this senseless murder has been a great source of sadness for us all, said Claudia Wolf, a family friend of Bernd's, after Fakhreddin's arrest. We hope that this will be the first step for his friends here and his family in Germany to get some closure, and to find out why this happened. Mildred Matheny was born on February 27, 1907, in Arkansas, and was one of 6 children. Her father died of a heart attack when she was young, leaving Mildred's mother to raise the children on her own. As an adult, Mildred married, had a son, and became a nurse. According to her son Gary, she was articulate and thrifty. She was talented at cooking and at sewing, and could make shirts for her son out of hog feed bags that he claimed were nicer than anyone's available at any store. Mildred worked for 40 years as a psychiatric nurse in Little Rock and was dedicated to her family. These two aspects of her life would eventually intersect, and she would provide care for her brother when his mental state began to decline. Unfortunately, Mildred began losing her own mental faculties when she was in her 70s, and she herself required help from her siblings. Mildred, now a widow, moved to Lake Worth, Florida, to live with her younger sister, Gladys Nowlin, when she began suffering from dementia. Mildred could not leave home on her own, because her condition would cause her to become disoriented and get lost. She did leave the home on her own on a few occasions, and would wander around the neighborhood, requiring help to get back home. She would often be found near a laundromat, close to her sister's house. On April 27, 1985, 78-year-old Mildred again somehow got out of the house on her own. Witnesses reported seeing her walking in the neighborhood sometime between 3:30 and 4 p.m., wearing an orange blouse over her pink pajamas. Upon realizing that Mildred had gotten out of the house, Mildred's sister Gladys went to the laundromat where Mildred had wandered off to in the past. She was not there. Gladys could not find Mildred in the neighborhood, so she reported her missing at 4:30 p.m. Just before 10 p.m. that same night, a passerby traveling on Old Indiantown Road near 125th Avenue in Jupiter, approximately 30 miles north of Lake Worth, discovered Mildred along a dirt road. Mildred was unconscious, having been severely beaten. Police would later say that they believed her head had been beaten with a blunt object. She was naked, and her clothes and blood-stained dentures were found nearby. She had been raped. Mildred was rushed to Martin Memorial Hospital in Stuart, Florida. Her son Gary rushed to Florida from his home in Arkansas to be with her. Mildred died as a result of her injuries on May 8, 1985, 11 days after she was attacked. The medical examiner ruled her death a homicide, caused by a heart arrhythmia stemming from her injuries, including a skull fracture and internal bleeding. Witnesses reported seeing Mildred near the intersection of Dixie Highway and Lucerne Avenue, less than 2 miles from her home. She had gotten into a brown, 2-door, 1967 Oldsmobile Delta 88 with a white interior, driven by a man who told the witnesses that he was her neighbor and would be driving her home. Despite having such a specific description of his vehicle and of the man himself from the witnesses, police in 1985 could not identify the man. Mildred's case went cold, despite police revisiting the case and issuing new appeals to the public for information over the years. In March of 2021, the DNA profile extracted from vaginal swabs taken from Mildred was entered into the combined DNA index system, and a match was found. Police obtained a warrant for a new DNA sample, and then visited the home of the man, whose DNA matched that from Mildred's rape kit, taking a new cheek swab to confirm the match. Testing of the DNA from that swab confirmed that it was this suspect's DNA found on the swab from the rape kit. On April 22, 2021, 61-year-old Richard Curtis Lang Sr. of Boynton Beach, Florida, was arrested on charges of first-degree murder, kidnapping, false imprisonment, and sexual assault with a weapon or force. He pled not guilty to the charges the following day and is currently being held without bond at the Palm Beach County Jail. Lang has a criminal record, which includes aggravated assault convictions in 1983 and 1993. He has faced minor drug charges, as well as gun charges in 2006 and 2012. He has never served more than a short jail sentence. He was obligated to provide a sample of his DNA in 2006, after he pled guilty to a charge of carrying a concealed weapon, and was given probation. His arrest record lists his current occupation as disabled. Lang's attorney, Scott Skier, says his client vehemently denies any involvement in the crime. We look forward to aggressively challenging the forensic evidence attributed to Mr. Lang. Nothing in Mr. Lang's past indicates a propensity for such abhorrent behavior, Mr. Skier said in a statement. Now 88 years old, Mildred's son, Gary Matheny, had given up hope that his mother's killer would be found, and was overjoyed to learn that such a major development had finally been made in her case. It's been a long time, and I'm thankful to the cold case people for finding that dastardly SOB. It was a terrible death for my mother, he said following Lang's arrest. "59-year-old Virginia Hannon was a widow who lived alone on West Street in Pembroke, Massachusetts. For many years, she worked as a cook and lunch lady at Bryantville Elementary School. Her love of children and of food extended beyond her work, and she was known to bake treats to give out to the children who lived in her neighborhood. She also had a love of animals and cared for stray dogs and cats. According to her family, she was a happy person who was always fun to be around. She loved her community and was dedicated to her family. On February 13, 1984, Virginia's body was found on her bed, covered by a sheet. Police believed she had been killed the night before, on February 12th. She had been stabbed once in the eye and 6 times in the abdomen, kicked so hard that a shoe imprint was left on her body, and strangled with nylon stockings. Virginia's murder was the first in Pembroke in a decade, and it came as a shock to her community. Her family was heartbroken to lose such a kind woman in such a brutal fashion. Police initially theorized that Virginia had been killed during a botched break-in. Virginia had recently retired from her job at the school after inheriting $380,000 from her aunt, who had lived in California. Virginia never flaunted her wealth, still driving her old car and being thrifty with her purchases. However, she had told friends about the money, so word of it may have spread through town, and Virginia's killer may have come to her home to try to steal some of her newfound wealth. Police launched an extensive investigation and interviewed more than 50 people, but no arrests were made, and the case went cold. Authorities continued to revisit it, and Virginia's family worked to keep the case alive, holding vigils for Virginia as recently as 2019 to mark the 35th anniversary of her death. Earlier that same year, in January of 2019, authorities had re-examined the evidence from the case and found that DNA found on broken glass from Virginia's door, bloody paper towels left in her home, and the stocking used to strangle Virginia all came from the same man. They then tried to use genetic genealogy to identify potential suspects, but the effort was unsuccessful. An unexpected phone call would soon change the course of the investigation, and on March 18, 2021, Plymouth County District Attorney Tim Cruz announced that Virginia's case had finally been solved. He identified the person whose DNA was found at the scene, and who his office believed to be Virginia's killer as Jesse Aylward. Aylward had been 22 years old at the time of Virginia's murder, and had a criminal record that detailed crimes committed between the mid-1980s and mid-1990s. Authorities did not release details of this record beyond stating that it included what they described as some assaultive behavior. Aylward had come to investigators' attention on February 4, 2020, when one of his friends, whose identity is being withheld, called them. The informant told them that in early 2019, Aylward had admitted to killing a woman in Pembroke many years earlier. They had called in this information on that particular day because Aylward had died the day before. The informant was interviewed and is not facing any charges related to the case. Because Aylward had just died when investigators learned of his confession, his body was still at Brockton Hospital, where he had passed away, and they were able to obtain a DNA sample from it. His DNA was ultimately found to be a match to the DNA found on the various items from the crime scene. Between the statement from the witness and the DNA evidence, District Attorney Cruz is confident that Aylward was responsible for Virginia's death, even though Aylward is not alive to face charges in court. While Virginia's family is grateful to finally have answers in her case, they do wish that Aylward had been held responsible for her murder. His death also prevents them from trying to get him to reveal the motive for the crime. They are hoping that Aylward being publicly identified will encourage people who knew him to re-examine their memories and report any information they may have about Aylward or why he committed such a seemingly senseless and brutal crime. "Somebody will remember, I believe," Virginia's nephew, Richard Hannon, said at the district attorney's press conference. "Somebody will be brave enough to come forward."